You're in the wrong place, old man. The cadet's voice cut through the crisp morning air like a blade. Staff Sergeant Mitchell, 22 years old and fresh from leadership training, blocked the ornate entrance to West Point's Eisenhower Hall. His pristine dress, gray uniform gleamed in the sunlight, every brass button polished to mirror perfection. The red sash across his chest marked him as part of the honor guard, tasked with maintaining the dignity and order of the most prestigious military graduation in America. Behind him, the majestic stone facade of West Point Military Academy rose like a monument to American military tradition. Flags snapped in the Hudson River breeze, and the distant sound of the Cadet Corps practicing their ceremonial march echoed across the parade grounds. It was June 2nd, graduation day, and the atmosphere was electric with anticipation. The old man standing before Mitchell was a stark contrast to the polished perfection around him. He appeared to be in his late 70s, with thin white hair that refused to stay completely combed and deep-set eyes that seemed to hold decades of untold stories. He wore a simple navy blue suit that had seen better days. The fabric slightly faded, the cuffs showing the slightest signs of wear, but it was clean and pressed with military precision. In his weathered hands, he clutched a worn leather folder. "I have business here," the old man said quietly, his voice carrying a gravelly authority that seemed at odds with his humble appearance. Mitchell's partner, Cadet Captain Reynolds, stepped forward. At 21, Reynolds was everything the Academy prided itself on producing: confident, sharp, and absolutely convinced of his own authority. His family had attended West Point for 3 generations, and he wore that legacy like armor. "Business," Reynolds scoffed, his voice dripping with condescension. "Sir, this is the United States Military Academy graduation ceremony. You can't just wander in here claiming you have business. This isn't some community college open house." The old man's eyes flicked from Mitchell to Reynolds, then passed them to the grand entrance, where distinguished families in their finest attire were streaming past, guided by polite ushers. Generals with stars gleaming on their shoulders walked alongside proud parents, their conversations a low hum of excitement and pride. The contrast between these honored guests and the plain-dressed old man was stark and unmistakable. "I understand what today is," the old man replied, his tone remaining steady despite the insult. "I just need to—" "Need to what?" Mitchell interrupted, stepping closer. His youth and authority had gone to his head, and he was savoring this moment of power. "Look around you, sir. See all these people in formal attire? See the uniforms, the medals, the invitations they're showing at every checkpoint. You're wearing a cheap suit and carrying what looks like a grocery store folder." A small crowd began to gather, other cadets who had noticed the commotion, along with some early arriving family members who paused to observe the scene with a mixture of curiosity and discomfort. Among them was Cadet First Class Sarah Chen, a high-achieving senior who was scheduled to graduate in 2 hours. She watched with growing unease as her fellow cadets publicly humiliated an elderly civilian. Reynolds pulled out his smartphone and began recording. "This is going to be good," he muttered to Mitchell. "Old guy thinks he can crash West Point graduation. Wait till the guys see this." "Please," the old man said, opening his leather folder slightly. "If you could just look at—" "I don't need to look at anything," Mitchell snapped, slamming the folder shut with his hand. The gesture was aggressive, dismissive, and completely inappropriate for someone wearing the uniform of West Point. "What I need is for you to turn around and find whatever tour group you wandered away from. The visitor center is about a mile back down the road." The humiliation was public and calculated. Several families had now stopped to watch, their faces showing a mixture of embarrassment and pity for the old man. Children tugged at their parents' sleeves, asking in loud whispers why the soldiers were being mean to the grandpa. Reynolds, emboldened by the growing audience, decided to deliver what he thought would be the killing blow. He stepped uncomfortably close to the old man, invading his personal space with deliberate intimidation. "Let me guess," he said, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "You're going to tell us you're some kind of war hero, right? That you deserve special treatment? That we should just wave you through because you served in, what was it, Vietnam? Korea?" The old man's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but he said nothing. "Here's the thing, Grandpa," Reynolds continued, clearly enjoying himself. "Even if you did serve, which I doubt, looking at you, this isn't a soup kitchen or a VA hospital. This is West Point. This is where America creates its leaders. It's elite. You want to pay your respects. There's a museum down the hill. Buy a ticket like everyone else." Mitchell joined in, sensing his partner's momentum. "Besides, if you were really somebody important, where are your medals? Where are your ribbons? I don't see a single piece of military hardware on you. Real veterans wear their service with pride." The old man looked down at his simple suit, his expression unreadable. When he looked back up, there was something different in his eyes. Not anger, but a profound sadness mixed with something that looked almost like pity. Some of us, he said quietly, prefer to wear our service in our hearts, not on our chests. The response only fueled Reynolds' arrogance. Oh, that's rich. That's exactly what someone would say if they never actually served. Listen, old man, I come from a family of warriors. My grandfather fought in World War II, my father in Vietnam. I know what a real soldier looks like, and it's not you. Cadet Chen, still watching from the growing crowd, felt her stomach turn. This was wrong on every level. The Academy's honor code, duty, honor, country seemed to be crumbling before her eyes, as her classmates publicly shamed an elderly civilian whose only crime was asking for help. The old man tried once more to open his folder. If you would just... That's it, Mitchell announced, reaching for his radio. Security, this is Cadet Mitchell at the main entrance. I have an individual here who is refusing to comply with entry requirements. He's becoming disruptive and needs to be escorted off the premises. The radio crackled back immediately. Copy that, Mitchell. Security en route. As they waited for security to arrive, Reynolds decided to twist the knife one final time. He pulled out his phone and held it up, clearly recording. Say hi to YouTube, Grandpa. Delusional old man crashes West Point graduation. This is going to go viral. The humiliation reached its absolute peak as uniformed security guards approached. The old man would be physically removed from the grounds in full view of hundreds of witnesses, while cadets recorded it for social media mockery. It was the complete destruction of an elderly man's dignity, carried out by the very institution that claimed to instill honor and respect in America's future leaders. But just as the security guards reached for the old man's arms, Cadet Chen made a decision that would change everything. She had been raised to respect her elders, and more importantly, she had been trained to recognize when something was profoundly wrong. She pulled out her own phone, but instead of recording the humiliation, she dialed a number she had memorized during her 4 years at the Academy. The number belonged to Colonel Patricia Hartman, the Academy's deputy commandant, and a woman known throughout West Point for her unwavering integrity and her encyclopedic knowledge of the institution's history. Chen had interned in Hartman's office the previous summer and had learned that the colonel maintained an open-door policy for cadets who faced genuine ethical dilemmas. Colonel Hartman, the voice answered on the second ring. Ma'am, this is Cadet Chen. I'm at the main entrance to Eisenhower Hall, and there's a situation here that requires your immediate attention. What kind of situation, Chen? Chen lowered her voice, turning away from the confrontation. Ma'am, there's an elderly civilian here trying to enter the graduation ceremony. Cadets Mitchell and Reynolds are having him arrested. He keeps trying to show them something from a folder, but they won't look at it. Ma'am, this doesn't feel right. The way they're treating him, it goes against everything we're supposed to stand for. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Did you say an elderly civilian with a folder? Yes, ma'am. He appears to be in his 70s, wearing a navy blue suit. He seems, I don't know how to explain it, ma'am. He carries himself like military, but these cadets are treating him like he's nobody. Another pause, longer this time. Cadet Chen, what did you say your name was? Sarah Chen, ma'am, class of 2024. Chen, I need you to listen to me very carefully. Under no circumstances are you to allow that man to be removed from the premises. Do you understand me? Ma'am? I don't care what you have to do. Stand in front of the security guards if you have to. I am personally coming down there right now, and if that man is gone when I arrive, there will be consequences that extend far beyond anything you can imagine. The line went dead. Chen stared at her phone, her heart racing. She had never heard Colonel Hartman speak with such urgency, such barely controlled intensity. Something about this situation was far more serious than anyone realized. She looked back at the scene unfolding before her. The security guards had reached the old man and were preparing to escort him away. Mitchell and Reynolds stood to the side, smug satisfaction written across their faces. The crowd of onlookers watched with uncomfortable fascination. Chen made her decision. She pushed through the crowd and stepped directly between the security guards and the old man. Stop, she called out, her voice carrying the authority of her rank. This man is not to be removed. Mitchell spun around, his face flushed with anger. Chen, what the hell are you doing? Get out of the way! I cannot do that, Chen replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. Reynolds pushed past Mitchell, getting right in Chen's face. Are you out of your mind? You're interfering with a security operation. I'll have you written up for insubordination. But Chen held her ground. She had no idea who the old man was or why Colonel Hartman had reacted so strongly to her call, but she knew with absolute certainty that she was doing the right thing. The honor code demanded it. The standoff continued for exactly 3 minutes and 47 seconds. Then the sound that would haunt Mitchell and Reynolds for the rest of their military careers began to echo across the parade grounds. It started low, almost subsonic, the rumble of multiple high-performance engines approaching at speed. The sound grew louder, more distinct, until it became unmistakable, a motorcade of official vehicles moving with emergency urgency. The crowd turned as one to see three black SUVs with government plates racing up the hill toward Eisenhower Hall. They weren't moving with the dignified pace of ceremonial transport, they were moving with the terrifying speed of a crisis response. The vehicles screeched to a halt in perfect formation just yards from the entrance. Doors flew open with military precision, and out stepped not security personnel, but high-ranking academy officials. Colonel Hartman emerged from the lead vehicle, her face a mask of controlled fury. Behind her came Brigadier General Williams, the Academy's commandant, and following him, the one person whose presence made every cadet's blood run cold, Lieutenant General Robert Morrison, Superintendent of West Point. The three-star general wore his dress blue uniform, every ribbon and medal precisely placed, his bearing that of a man who had commanded tens of thousands of soldiers in combat. But it was his expression that sent waves of terror through the assembled cadets. He looked like a man who had discovered a betrayal so profound it shook his faith in everything he held sacred. The crowd parted like the Red Sea as the three officers strode toward the confrontation. General Morrison's eyes swept the scene, taking in the security guards, the recording cadets, and finally settling on the elderly man in the Navy suit. What happened next would become Academy legend. Lieutenant General Morrison, one of the most powerful military officers in America, came to a complete halt 3 feet from the old man. In the absolute silence that had fallen over the crowd, Morrison drew himself to his full height, brought his heels together with a sharp crack, and delivered the sharpest, most respectful salute of his 30-year career. "Professor," Morrison said, his command voice carrying to every corner of the gathering crowd, "it is an honor to see you again, sir." The word hit like a thunderclap. Professor, not sir, not veteran, but professor. The title reserved for the Academy's most revered instructors, the men and women who had shaped generations of American military leaders. Mitchell felt the ground shift beneath his feet. Reynolds' smartphone slipped from his suddenly nerveless fingers, clattering on the stone pavement. Colonel Hartman stepped forward, her own voice trembling with emotion. "Ladies and gentlemen, what you are witnessing is a profound failure of everything this institution stands for. You have been watching the public humiliation of Professor Emeritus James MacArthur." The name hit the crowd like a physical blow. Even the youngest cadets knew that name. It was carved into the stone of the Academy's Memorial Hall. It graced the title page of the leadership manual every cadet was required to master. "Professor MacArthur," General Morrison continued, his voice growing stronger, more passionate with each word, "served this academy for 37 years. He was not just an instructor, he was the instructor. He taught leadership, military history, and ethics to over 15,000 cadets during his tenure." The general paused, letting the weight of that number sink in. 15,000, an army's worth of officers, all personally trained by the man these cadets had tried to have arrested. Among his former students, Morrison continued, his eyes beginning to sweep the crowd with laser-like intensity, are 4 current 4-star generals, 12 3-stars, 37 2-stars, and more colonels and generals than I could name in an hour. 3 Medal of Honor recipients, 7 chiefs of staff of various service branches, and 2 secretaries of defense. The silence was so complete it felt like a vacuum. Not even the wind dared to stir. Brigadier General Williams stepped forward, his voice thick with emotion. "Professor MacArthur didn't just teach these men and women. He shaped them. He took teenagers fresh from high school and forged them into the leaders who have defended this nation for 4 decades. The general pointed a rigid finger at the leather folder still clutched in the old man's weathered hands. "Do you want to know what's in that folder? Do you want to know what these cadets refuse to look at? It's not an invitation to today's ceremony. It's something far more precious." Professor MacArthur, who had remained silent through this entire revelation, finally opened his folder with hands that trembled slightly, not from fear or humiliation but from age and the weight of memory. Inside were dozens of photographs, yellowed with time but carefully preserved. "Those are pictures," General Morrison explained, his voice dropping to an almost whisper that somehow carried to every listener, "of every single graduating class Professor MacArthur taught. 43 years worth of young faces, bright with hope and determination. Some of those faces belong to the men and women who are leading our military today. Others belong to heroes who never made it home." The professor looked up from his folder, his eyes finding General Morrison's. "I just wanted to see them graduate," he said, his voice soft but clear. One more time, I wanted to see another class of America's finest take their oath and begin their service. The emotional weight of his words hit the crowd like a tsunami. This wasn't some random old man trying to crash a ceremony. This was the Academy's living memory, a man who had dedicated his entire adult life to preparing young Americans for military service, asking for nothing more than the chance to witness the fruits of his life's work. General Morrison turned his attention to Mitchell and Reynolds, and when he spoke, his voice carried the cold fury of absolute command authority. Cadet Staff Sergeant Mitchell, Cadet Captain Reynolds. The words were clipped, precise, and colder than a Montana winter. In your arrogance, your assumption that rank and uniform automatically grant you wisdom, you have committed an act so profoundly disgraceful that it shakes my faith in this institution. He stepped closer to them, and both young men visibly flinched. You demanded to see this man's credentials. Let me give you his credentials. Distinguished Service Cross for Valor in Vietnam, where he served as a young lieutenant before beginning his teaching career. 2 Bronze Stars with V device, Purple Heart with Oak Leaf Cluster. But more than that, far more than that, he holds something that no medal can represent, the respect and gratitude of every single officer he ever taught. The general's voice began to rise, carrying across the grounds like a battle cry. You mocked him for not wearing his service on his chest. Let me tell you where Professor MacArthur wears his service. It's in the thousands of officers who credit him with saving their lives through the lessons he taught. It's in the battles won by leaders he trained. It's in the young soldiers who came home because their commanders learned honor, courage, and tactical brilliance in his classroom. Mitchell was visibly shaking now. Reynolds had gone completely pale. His earlier bravado evaporated like morning mist. You filmed his humiliation for social media entertainment, Morrison continued, his voice now carrying the full weight of his fury. You took a man who has given his life to serving this nation and turned him into a joke for your own amusement. You have disgraced not only yourselves, but every cadet who has ever walked these grounds. Colonel Hartman stepped forward, her own voice adding to the verbal assault. The irony of this situation is so profound it's almost poetic. You stand there in your dress gray uniforms, convinced of your own importance while refusing to recognize the man who literally wrote the book on military leadership that you've been studying for 4 years. She gestured toward a nearby statue of a Civil War general. Every principle carved into those statues, every lesson in your textbooks, every concept of honor and duty you've been taught. Professor MacArthur either wrote it, taught it, or helped refine it. You have been studying his life's work while simultaneously humiliating the man who created it. The crowd of families and visitors who had gathered to witness this confrontation were getting an unexpected education in military values. They watched as some of the nation's highest-ranking officers delivered a masterclass in respect, humility, and the true meaning of service. Cadet Chen, still standing protectively near Professor MacArthur, felt tears streaming down her face. She had known she was witnessing something wrong, but she had had no idea she was watching the disrespect of a living legend. Professor MacArthur, with the grace that had defined his entire career, stepped forward and placed a gentle hand on General Morrison's arm. General, he said quietly, they're just young men doing what they thought was right. They didn't know. How could they? I'm not the same man who taught their fathers and grandfathers. I'm just an old professor who wanted to see his boys and girls one more time. His grace was more devastating than any rebuke. Here was a man who had been publicly humiliated, threatened with arrest, and mocked for social media entertainment, and his response was to defend his tormentors. General Morrison looked at the professor with something approaching reverence. Sir, they should have known. That's the point. The respect due to age and service shouldn't require a 3-star general to enforce it. It should be automatic, instinctive. He turned back to Mitchell and Reynolds, his voice dropping to a whisper that was somehow more terrifying than any shout. You will report to my office at 0600 hours tomorrow morning. You will bring with you written statements explaining your actions, along with formal letters of apology to Professor MacArthur. You will also bring me every social media post, every recording, every photograph you took during this incident. Mitchell found his voice, though it came out as barely a croak. Yes, sir. Furthermore, Morrison continued, you will spend the remainder of your cadet careers in the Honor Remediation Program. You will study the very text Professor MacArthur wrote, under the supervision of officers who understand what true honor means. And you will pray every single day that this man's incredible grace prevents me from recommending your dismissal from this academy. But Professor MacArthur wasn't finished demonstrating the character that had made him a legend. He walked slowly over to Mitchell and Reynolds, both of whom looked like they wanted to disappear into the ground. Son, he said to Mitchell, his voice kind despite everything that had happened, that uniform you're wearing represents something bigger than yourself. It's not about the authority it gives you. It's about the responsibility it places on you. The responsibility to protect those who can't protect themselves, to serve those who have already served, and to remember that true strength shows itself through gentleness, not force. He turned to Reynolds. And young man, your family's military service is something to be proud of. But it doesn't automatically make you wise or worthy. Wisdom comes from listening, learning, and understanding that the most important people are often the ones who look the least important. The lesson was delivered without anger, without condescension, with nothing but the patient instruction of a teacher who had spent his life helping young people become better than they were. General Morrison gestured toward the entrance to Eisenhower Hall. Professor MacArthur, would you do us the honor of joining the reviewing party for today's ceremony? Your place is not in the audience, it's on the platform with the Academy leadership. The old professor smiled, the first genuine smile of the entire morning. General, I would be honored. As the group began moving toward the entrance, something remarkable happened. Word of the confrontation had spread through the gathering crowd of families and Academy personnel. One by one, people began to recognize who Professor MacArthur was. Conversations stopped mid-sentence as parents realized they were looking at the man who had taught their sons and daughters. Active duty officers in the crowd snapped to attention and saluted as he passed. But the most moving moment came when a group of graduating cadets, having heard whispers of what had transpired, broke from their formation and approached their old professor. These were young men and women who had taken his advanced leadership course, who had spent hours in his office seeking guidance, who had been shaped by his wisdom and experience. Professor, said Cadet First Captain Jessica Martinez, the highest-ranking cadet in the Academy, we're so sorry, we had no idea. No apologies necessary, Captain, MacArthur replied, his eyes bright with pride as he looked at the young officers he had helped train. You've all made me prouder than you'll ever know. As they walked toward the ceremony, General Morrison leaned close to Professor MacArthur. Sir, there's something else. The Academy Board of Visitors voted last month to name the new Leadership Center after you. We were going to announce it during today's ceremony, but given what's happened, it's perfect timing, General, MacArthur replied. Sometimes the best lessons come from our failures, not our successes. These young cadets learned something today that no textbook could have taught them. The graduation ceremony that followed was unlike any in West Point's long history. When Professor MacArthur was introduced to the audience of families and dignitaries, the standing ovation lasted for nearly 5 minutes. Parents who had only just learned his name applauded as enthusiastically as generals who had served under his former students. But the most powerful moment came during the oath-taking ceremony, as 1,200 new second lieutenants raised their right hands to swear their allegiance to the Constitution. Professor MacArthur stood beside the Academy leadership, tears streaming down his weathered face. These weren't his students. He had retired from active teaching 3 years earlier, but they were his legacy, his final gift to the nation he had served for so many decades. Mitchell and Reynolds, standing in their formation with their classmates, felt the weight of their failure with every word of the oath. They were swearing to support and defend the Constitution, to bear true faith and allegiance to the United States of America, while knowing they had failed their first real test of character just hours earlier. The ceremony concluded with the traditional tossing of cadet hats into the air, a moment of pure joy and celebration. But as the white hats rained down from the blue sky, Professor MacArthur was surrounded by a different kind of celebration. Alumni in the audience, men and women in their 40s, 50s, and 60s, approached him with tears in their eyes. Professor, do you remember me? Class of '89, sir. Your strategic leadership course changed my life. Sir, I'm Colonel Patterson, class of '94. I used your lessons on ethical decision-making every day in Afghanistan. Professor MacArthur, I'm General Susan Walsh. You probably don't remember me, but you wrote me a letter of recommendation for flight school. I just made my first star last month. He remembered them all. Every name, every face, every conversation. That was his gift, his curse, and his glory. He had never forgotten a single student in 43 years of teaching. As the sun set over the Hudson River and the last of the celebration wound down, Professor MacArthur sat alone on a bench overlooking the parade grounds where thousands of his former students had marched. General Morrison found him there, still in his dress uniform but with his tie loosened and his bearing more relaxed. Long day, Professor? The best kind of long day, General. I got to see my boys and girls become officers. I got to watch young people learn something about character they'll never forget. And I got reminded why I spent my life doing what I did. Morrison sat down beside him, 2 old soldiers watching the place where America's military leaders were forged. What will you tell Mitchell and Reynolds when they come to see you? MacArthur was quiet for a long moment, considering, I'll tell them the same thing I told every student who ever disappointed me. That failure isn't the end of the story. It's the beginning of wisdom. That character isn't about never making mistakes. It's about learning from them and becoming better. You really think they can recover from this? General, some of my best students were the ones who failed the hardest before they found their way. Pride comes before the fall, but humility comes after it. If they're smart enough to learn from what happened today, they might become the kind of officers this country needs. In the weeks that followed, the story of what happened at West Point spread throughout the military community, not as a social media joke, as Reynolds had originally intended, but as a powerful lesson about respect, service, and the danger of judging people by their appearance. Mitchell and Reynolds did report to General Morrison's office the following morning. They did enter the honor remediation program, and over the following months, under the patient guidance of Professor MacArthur himself, they began the long journey from arrogant young cadets to humble future officers. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The man they had tried to humiliate became their teacher, their mentor, and ultimately their salvation. Professor MacArthur passed away peacefully 3 years later. At the age of 81, his funeral at West Point was attended by over 2,000 people, including a former president, 6 four-star generals, and hundreds of officers whose lives he had shaped. Mitchell and Reynolds, now young second lieutenants, served as part of his honor guard. But perhaps the most fitting tribute was the simple plaque installed at the entrance to Eisenhower Hall where their confrontation had taken place. It read, "In memory of Professor Emeritus James MacArthur, who taught us that true leadership is measured not by the authority we wield, but by the respect we show to others, especially those who seem to have no power at all." The story of the old man at the gate became required reading at West Point, a cautionary tale about assumptions, respect, and the hidden dignity that exists in every human being. It was a reminder that heroes don't always look like heroes, that wisdom doesn't always come in uniform, and that the most important lessons are often learned in moments of failure rather than triumph. And sometimes late at night when the academy was quiet and the Hudson River reflected the lights of the barracks, cadets would swear they could still hear Professor MacArthur's voice echoing across the parade grounds, teaching one final lesson about honor, duty, and the true meaning of service to something greater than oneself.